The video you're about to watch contains a police interview conducted shortly after a person was reported missing. This footage was exclusively provided to True Crime Tales by the Crow Wing County Sheriff's Office. Viewer discretion is advised. Does he have any reason to just disappear or to make it look like he's gone missing? I don't think so. I mean, he was pretty, possessive. It all began like an ordinary missing person case. On a Friday, the Crow Wing County Sheriff's Office received a report about 23-year-old Bryce Brogel, who hadn't been seen since leaving a residence in Center Township 2 days earlier, on Wednesday. But this was not a typical case of someone vanishing without a trace. Bryce was last seen on October 26, 2022, in a quiet, rural town in Minnesota. His girlfriend, Cordelia Ilex, made a frantic call to the authorities 2 days later, reporting him missing. She explained that Bryce was last headed to a storage unit with her father. That was the last anyone heard from him. So you left here? Yeah, we left here, and the whole thing happened right out there. We just stepped out, had things loaded up, and then the lights appeared. It happened right here? Yeah, it was just down there. The lights came on. The vehicle was a dark gray, maybe like one of the newer models. But I'm not sure. It happened so fast. They stopped right in front of our vehicles. And then? They put him in the back seat. One of the officers, or what looked like an officer, walked around, got into the passenger side, and then they left. As the investigation continued, authorities uncovered unsettling messages Cordelia had sent Bryce the night he went missing. The messages were filled with concern, confusion, and fear. She texted, "I love you. I already miss you. Are you coming back for me? Please." But Bryce never replied. The investigation only grew darker, and what started as a search for a missing 23-year-old began to reveal much more sinister possibilities. A storage unit, a sled, and a haunting discovery in the woods all contributed to the mystery of Bryce Brogel's disappearance. Let's delve into this chilling case that would prove to be more disturbing than anyone could have anticipated on that October day in 2022. When Cordelia's longtime boyfriend vanished without a trace, it was a chilly day in Center Township, with temperatures lingering just above freezing. This lakefront area, typically filled with vacationers seeking a nature retreat, was now nearly empty as the colder weather drove visitors home. Cordelia, who lived in town along with her father and boyfriend, had just returned from a month-long trip and was waiting for Bryce to come back. He had gone with her father to a nearby storage unit to store some belongings. Cordelia and Bryce had been dating since February 2022, now 8 months together, and had just arrived back in town after their cross-country trip. Bryce knew her father Michael well enough that they had gone to the storage facility on their own, leaving Cordelia at home to shower and wait. As time passed, Cordelia grew impatient and texted Michael, wondering what was taking so long. The storage unit was only about a third of a mile from her house, a short 10-minute walk, so there seemed no reason for the trip to be delayed. Eventually, her father returned alone. He told her that while they were at the storage unit, men in 2 unmarked vehicles had shown up and taken Bryce into custody. They looked official but displayed no identification, and he couldn't tell her which agency they represented or what charges Bryce might be facing. Cordelia trusted her father's account and texted Bryce, asking, "Baby?" and waiting for a response to explain the sudden arrest. But Bryce never replied. On Friday, October 28th, with no word from Bryce, Cordelia went to the Crow County Sheriff's Office and filed a missing persons report. She shared everything her father had told her, making him the first person the police turned to in their investigation. The officers tracked Michael down at a family Halloween party in Brainerd, where he agreed to take them to the storage facility for questioning. "I knew it was only a matter of time before you'd be talking with me," Michael said, recalling his conversation with Cordelia. He was cooperative with investigators, walking them through the events of that evening. "Could we go over it again from the beginning?" the officers asked. Michael explained, "We came here, unloaded everything. I was driving the white Escape with a U-Haul trailer. We got right here from the house, unloaded, and it took about 45 minutes because Bryce was sorting through things, deciding what to keep or toss. Michael said they had arrived at the storage unit around 5 p.m. and were finishing up by about 5:45 p.m. But just as they were leaving, things took an unexpected turn. "It happened right out here. We were just pulling away, getting up to speed, when the lights came on," he explained. According to Michael, he and Bryce were stopped as they were leaving in his white Ford Escape. The men who approached had lights on their vehicles, similar to those used on unmarked police cars, though not the typical siren lights. The men detained both Michael and Bryce, taking Bryce in one vehicle and Michael in another. "Which car did you end up in?" an officer asked. "The white Ford Escape," Michael replied. "And Bryce?" "They put him in the dark gray car," he explained. The investigators then asked, "Was there a barrier or cage in the car you were in?" Michael described it as a plain, unmarked vehicle with no visible police markings inside, except for a small computer console on the center dashboard, folded down. As authorities continued questioning Michael, they began to piece together the strange and disturbing events leading to Bryce's disappearance. Michael mentioned that he and Bryce were separated during the incident. If this was an official arrest, it was clearly a serious operation involving multiple individuals. "Did he say anything to you when they took him?" an officer asked. "No, not really," Michael replied. "When we left here, he just thanked me for helping out, and that was it." "Any other conversations between you two?" "Not much. On the way here, I asked him how the drive had been. He just said it was fine, nothing special. I wasn't really interested in talking much." There were hints of underlying tension in the family, and it seemed that Michael didn't particularly enjoy spending time with Bryce. This raised the question, why did Michael offer to go to the storage facility with Bryce without his daughter? "So, did Cordelia not want to join you two? Or what happened?" an officer inquired. "She said she needed to shower after the trip. She felt grimy and didn't want to go along," Michael explained. For Michael, this was just a routine trip to the storage unit that had suddenly taken a strange turn due to whatever situation Bryce had gotten into. Bryce and Cordelia had only just returned from a cross-country trip that afternoon, and Michael wondered if it had anything to do with that. "Did you know she was coming back?" one officer asked. "She called me on Sunday and said, 'Dad, I'll be back in about a week.' I thought, great, and asked her what was up. She said things weren't going well out there. Then on Monday, she called again and said, 'Dad, we're actually coming home tonight.' I was shocked and asked, 'Tonight? Why so soon?' She said things had gone bad, and they had to leave." It sounded like Cordelia and Bryce had gotten caught up in something far bigger than they could manage, potentially something even criminal. "After everything happened, I actually went back to the house because I thought she might be taken too. I figured when I returned, she'd be gone too," Michael recalled. "So you thought they'd gotten into something serious during the trip?" asked the officer. "Yes, I did," Michael answered. "When the guys were taking me aside, I overheard one of them mention Arizona." Together, Cordelia and Bryce had traveled across the country to Arizona and then to Washington State. They had left the day after Cordelia's graduation party in June and spent nearly 4 months away from home, during which anything could have happened. Michael strongly believed that something significant had gone wrong. "When I got home, I just thought, what on earth happened? I asked Cordelia, 'What's going on?' And then I told her, 'Bryce has been arrested.' I told her they mentioned Arizona," Michael said. "But she just kept saying, 'Dad, it's nothing.' Eventually, though, she admitted that police had been called a few times because she showed up to work with bruises on her face. Despite these police interactions, no action had been taken. For Michael, this was just one example of the ongoing issues that fueled his dislike for Bryce. Back in March, when he came to stay with us, I saw a lot of verbal abuse toward Cordelia. One time she had a big bruise on her face. She claimed it was from wrestling around, but my other daughter had her doubts. She'd heard her crying too, so there was always tension and arguing with Bryce. Michael also said that Bryce was a regular marijuana user and revealed that both he and Cordelia each had 2 phones, a regular phone and a disposable flip phone. Finding Bryce's phone was urgent for investigators, but Michael said he didn't know where it was. As the interview continued into the evening, he shared more details. He explained that Cordelia had told him Bryce had a strange feeling on the drive back. Bryce had said he suspected that someone might end up getting arrested once they returned. He even mentioned the FBI. The investigators were open to the idea that Bryce's disappearance could have been orchestrated rather than forced. "Does he have any reason to just vanish or to make it seem like he has?" they asked. "I don't think so, no," Michael replied. "Cordelia told me they were planning to head back to Montana for work. He was, well, very possessive. All her texts, emails, everything went through his phone so he could monitor who she was talking to. He kept tabs on everything." The investigators then asked to check Michael's phone to verify his location history, as he was the last person to have seen Bryce. "After I got home, I ran over to Brainerd. I even talked to my uncle," Michael said, though he seemed to grow increasingly unclear about the details. About 10 minutes later, the investigators circled back to the topic of Bryce's phone, noticing inconsistencies. "So you've never had his phone in your possession?" one investigator asked. Michael hesitated before admitting, "Actually, it was in my car. I did take it. I just wanted my daughter away from him." He then confessed to discarding the phone in a gas station trash can in Brainerd that evening. When asked why he'd done this, Michael replied, "I was scared. I wanted to protect her." "To be honest, I was frightened by the whole thing," Michael admitted. "I was worried someone might track it down and come after my daughter." A complicated picture was starting to form. On one hand, there was this frightening tale of a couple pursued by law enforcement, as if they were modern-day Bonnie and Clyde on the run. On the other, there was Michael's apparent distrust and dislike for his daughter's boyfriend. To better understand this tangled situation, let's take a closer look at Bryce and Cordelia's relationship and the dynamics of the Lex family. Bryce Brogel was born in Brainerd in September 1999, recently celebrating his 23rd birthday during his road trip across the country with Cordelia. This trip represented much of what he cherished: exploring the West, embracing a simple and independent life. Bryce dreamed of eventually settling down in Alaska, where he hoped to create a self-sufficient homestead. He and Cordelia first met in February 2022, bonding over their mutual love for dogs and a shared passion for adventure. Cordelia, a few years younger than Bryce, graduated in June 2022, and the couple left for their journey shortly after. Part of her motivation for leaving was a stifling home environment. Cordelia described her parents as overprotective and often invading her personal boundaries. According to Cordelia, her parents had once even hired a private investigator to track a previous boyfriend. Her family life was further complicated by her mother's struggle with Huntington's disease and her close support of her younger sibling, who is transgender. These dynamics created tension at times within the family. Cordelia found her father, Michael, to be especially overbearing. While he seemed committed to his family, even having a tattoo that read, "Daddy's Little Girls," with a silhouette of him and his daughters, he could be a stressful presence at home. Michael, born in 1977, was 45 years old and had grown up in Peat Lakes, Minnesota, a suburb of Brainerd. After his parents divorced, his mother remarried, and Michael gained several younger half-siblings from her second marriage. Michael graduated from Peat Lakes High School in 1996 and moved to Center Township soon afterward. He had a background in construction but was now self-employed, taking on various odd jobs around the neighborhood. However, Michael had a criminal history. In early 1999, at 21, he pleaded guilty to third-degree criminal sexual conduct and received 5 years of probation. In 2018, he pleaded guilty to another sex offense, this time fourth-degree criminal sexual conduct involving an adult considered developmentally disabled and mentally impaired. Records indicate that the individual initially resisted, but eventually complied after his insistence. Because of these charges, Michael had undergone polygraph testing multiple times. In fact, he'd taken 4 polygraph tests, and there was talk of him possibly taking another as part of this investigation. "That's something that may come into play at some point," he acknowledged. In Minnesota, polygraph tests are used as part of certain investigations, but whether this would be necessary in Michael's case remained to be seen. A polygraph test can't legally be used against you, so if you take it and don't pass, it's not like we say, "Oh, you failed and that's it," the investigator explained.
If you do pass, though, it's one more thing that adds up to support your case. Michael nodded. I've taken them before, he said. Actually passed 4 of them. I had to take them. Then you understand how they work.
Yeah, he confirmed, though he acknowledged that the context of those tests had been different from this situation. Bryce Brogel had been missing for 2 days, and Michael's story was raising suspicions. At one point, he even admitted that he'd previously warned Bryce, saying, "I told him that if I ever saw another bruise on her, there wouldn't be any talking next time." Yet, he seemed prepared for the questions about his relationship with Bryce. "Doing something to him wouldn't fix my daughter's situation," he said. "She has to come to the realization herself if she doesn't want to be in it anymore. If she's really experiencing abuse, then as much as it hurts, she has to make that decision. I can't force her." "Yeah, I can tell this is weighing on you," one of the investigators replied. "I've stayed up nights over it, seeing her controlled like that, never knowing when I'll hear from her again." Michael seemed distraught, struggling to explain his feelings. "Sometimes," he continued, "you just want to scare the living daylights out of someone to keep them away from your child." Throughout the conversation outside the storage facility, Michael referred to Bryce in the past tense, which the investigators noted. "He thought he was the smartest guy around," Michael said, "always bragging about his test scores and how he'd done on the state tests. I told him once that people who talk like that usually aren't as clever as they think." He paused, adding, "That was just him." Michael then drifted into talk about counseling sessions he'd had with Cordelia. "I realize there's a lot I need to work on," he admitted. "Yeah, I get it," the investigator said. "You're a father." "I'm just a dad," Michael said, seemingly torn. "Look, I have another daughter to look after, and I'm not about to jeopardize my life by doing something that could send me to prison, leaving my family behind. It's just not worth it," Michael said firmly. "It would mean more to me if my daughter could tell him herself, 'I don't want you in my life anymore because of what you've done to me.' Then, if he wouldn't leave her alone, I'd go through the proper legal steps, a restraining order, or, if he hurt her, getting him arrested. That's what I want to do. I'd rather outsmart him legally than use fists, or worse, involve someone else in it." The investigator responded, "Well, I hope you know we're just doing our job here, trying to piece things together." "I've told you everything I know," Michael replied, seeming unsettled as the discussion shifted to phone records. "When you pull up all the phone data, you'll see there's nothing from my phone that could be any surprise. I'm everywhere. That's just how I am." "Were you answering any calls?" "No," Michael said. "Actually, I had turned it off. I can't remember if I ever turned it back on, but I don't think there should be anything unusual in my call records." At the end of the interview, the investigators verified that there was no active warrant for Bryce Brogel's arrest, nor any record of him being taken into custody. Later, when they searched the gas station garbage in Brainerd, they recovered both of Bryce's phones right where Michael had claimed he'd tossed them. While reviewing Michael's phone data, the investigators noticed something odd. Early on the morning of October 27th, the day after Bryce's disappearance, Michael had left his house at 4:45 a.m. He drove to his storage unit, stayed for about 22 minutes, then traveled to a public area near Lake Edward, where he remained for roughly an hour. This behavior was suspicious, prompting the police to get a search warrant for the storage unit. On October 29th, investigators searched the storage unit. Inside, on the concrete floor, they found a bottle of bleach containing traces of both Bryce's and Michael's DNA, along with remnants of a blood-like substance and drag marks consistent with something heavy having been moved on a sled. The next day, on October 30th, police followed GPS data from Michael's phone to a remote wooded area near Lake Edward. It was secluded, not a place someone would stumble across. They found a patch of sand that had been dug up recently, with broken branches stuck into the ground to cover the area and a layer of fresh leaves on top, which didn't match the older fallen leaves nearby. The excavation team arrived and began digging. Beneath the surface, they uncovered a body. It was Bryce Brogel. He had been shot in the back of the head. With the discovery of Bryce's body, Michael's involvement in the crime was undeniable. The evidence was now pointing directly to him as a primary suspect in Bryce's murder. This wasn't a shock to law enforcement, as 2 days prior, Michael's two half-siblings had already gone to the police, saying Michael had confessed. When Michael returned from his interview with investigators at the storage unit on October 28th, he spoke to his sister, Jen Baker, whom he'd seen at her party earlier that night. He asked to borrow her car, claiming he was worried police might track his truck. When she pressed him for a reason, he admitted he needed the car to bury Bryce's body. Michael confessed to Jen that he'd shot Bryce in the back of the head. He tried to reassure her, saying they'd never find Bryce's body. He even mentioned that he'd used a sled to move Bryce, as the body was too heavy to carry on his own, and asked for a bag of leaves from her garage to cover the burial site. This sled was later discovered in a ditch on the way to the storage unit, covered with a blanket and bearing dried red-brown stains. After Michael left, Jen called their half-brother Patrick to relay what she had heard. Patrick, who worked the night shift as a clerk in Pete Lakes, had a good relationship with local law enforcement due to his job. Feeling the gravity of the situation, he approached the police, requesting to remain anonymous. It seemed well known in their family that Michael believed Bryce was abusive toward Cordelia. However, all of Michael's talk to investigators about wanting Cordelia to decide on her own to leave Bryce turned out to be false. Michael was arrested in November 2022, facing a second-degree murder charge. The evidence indicated that he had shot Bryce from a distance in the storage unit, moved his body on a sled to the woods, and attempted to clean up the scene before burying Bryce and poorly camouflaging the site. As the investigation progressed, another witness came forward: Bryce and Cordelia's landlord in Washington state. The landlord revealed that Michael had once called him to ask if Bryce had harmed Cordelia. When the landlord mentioned seeing Cordelia with two black eyes, Michael told him he intended to kill Bryce and had already prepared a grave. This statement was corroborated by Michael's half-brother, who recalled Michael saying the same thing. Additional case details matched up as well, as Michael reportedly stored his firearms at his half-sister's place. At Jen's house on October 26th, just hours before Cordelia and Bryce returned to Minnesota, Michael picked up one of his firearms, claiming he needed it to deal with a rodent at a job site. But this wasn't an impulsive act, it was a carefully planned murder. On March 30th, 2023, prosecutors escalated the charges, and Michael was indicted by a grand jury for first-degree murder. His trial took place a year later, in 2024, where he testified in his own defense, repeating his belief that Bryce had been abusive. He recalled seeing unexplained bruises on Cordelia, which she would either deny or offer reasons for. He claimed that in July 2022, just a month into her travels with Bryce, she'd texted him, asking him to come and get her. She didn't share her location, and a few days later said everything was fine. Cordelia, however, presented a different picture during the trial, asserting that her relationship with Bryce had never involved physical violence. Her social media reflected her happiness with Bryce. On October 31st, after her father's arrest, she posted a heartfelt tribute to Bryce, calling him a guardian angel and expressing her love. She continued sharing memories of him on social media as her father was formally charged and gave no support to his claims. During the trial, Michael admitted to killing Bryce, but argued it wasn't planned. He claimed he had taken Bryce to the storage unit, intending to provoke a confrontation so he could later file charges to keep Bryce away from Cordelia. He said the gun was only with him because he'd used it for pest control at a client's property earlier that day. According to his account, he confronted Bryce about his treatment of Cordelia, and Bryce allegedly said, "She's mine, and she's my business." When Bryce reportedly added that he'd rather kill her than let her go, Michael said he shot him impulsively, acting to protect his daughter. The jury did not accept this defense. In April 2024, Michael was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and a lesser charge of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Cordelia continues to remember Bryce publicly, posting in March 2024 about Bryce and another lost loved one saying, "I think about you and Bryce all the time." What are your thoughts on this tragic case? Do you believe the killing was truly premeditated? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe and stay connected with our channel.